Hi, this is Miss Erica Johnson, and this video is going to be about Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. This is to help you realize what Chapter 1 and 2 is about. I'm going to go through Chapter 1 rather quickly because in my first video about the characters, that's what mainly Chapter 1 does, is go throughout the chapter and tell about each of the characters. In Chapter 2, I'll go a little bit more in depth of what each section is about for that chapter when they arrive at the island. So I'm going to get started. Again, you can pause this if you need to and come back to it or take notes. So you can see Chapter 1, first section, about Mr. Wargrave, and we find out about him. You did this with the first activity we did in class. You each had a section that talked about your character, and you had homework to read Chapter 1 and find out about those characters. I did in another video go more in depth about these characters, but if you ever really want to study up on the characters and what they look like, what kind of person they are, what kind of physical characteristics, if they were rich or poor, please go back to Chapter 1, and each section at the very beginning you can see has the name that section is what character that's focusing on. So Section 3 of Chapter 1 is focusing on Philip Lombard. You can also see Philip Lombard was invited by a Mr. Isaac Morris. That's an important piece of this to know. He's just a flat character. We don't know much about him, but it's important to still know that that's who invited Philip Lombard. Section 4, we have Miss Emily Brent, an older lady, and we see the letter right here of where she was invited, and she thought that person was Mrs. Oliver. And if you go to the next page, you'll see as well, here is where she kind of comes up with, oh yes, Miss Oliver. That's who she thought it was. I'm going to scroll on down. This section is Dr. Armstrong. He thought he was going to have a patient at the island of a Mrs. Owens. Section 7, Tony Marston. He thought he was going there to meet a buddy named Badger, and they were going to be there for a vacation. Section 8, Mr. Bloor. He thinks he's there for a job, and he decides to tell people that he's from South Africa. And he decides to tell them that he's Mr. Davis, but they soon find him out. Something interesting at the end of Chapter 1, Mr. Bloor, as he's getting off the train, an old man tells them that that Judgment Day is very close at hand for him, and that's important. That foreshadows something that's going to happen for Mr. Bloor, so keep that in mind. We are now ready to talk about Chapter 2. If you want to pause now and get your thoughts together about Chapter 1, that's fine. And excuse me as I'm scrolling up and down. I'm just trying to find where Chapter 2 begins. Chapter 2 in your book actually begins on page 19. So if you want to turn there, I'm going to be telling you the page numbers in your book. For some reason, Chapter 2 in this slide is telling you the sections are off. So if it's Section 2 or 3, it really is Section 3 or 4 in your book, and I'll explain as we get in there. This first part right here, outside Oak Bridge Station, they're all meeting. They're getting off the train, and two people decide to ride together. Vera Claythorne and Philip Lombard are riding in a taxi together, and they kind of have sort of a conversation. And then Emily Brent and Justice Wargrave ride together. And that kind of goes hand in hand. Remember, Justice Wargrave is older, Emily Brent is older, Vera Claythorne is younger, Philip Lombard is younger. So they kind of rode with who their peer was, the people that were their same age. And this on your book, if you'll actually turn to Section 2, Section 2 is when they start to meet more of the characters. They're getting ready. Section 2 starts on page 24 in your book. They're getting ready to meet everybody and get on the boat to go over to the island. Up in the search bar of... Let me see if I can move this real quick. Up in the search bar of a PDF, you can search different words. I'm actually going to search names Davis, and this comes up right here for me, and this is on page 25 in your book, where Mr. Bloor decides to tell them his name is Davis and he's from Natal, South Africa. Mr. Justice Wargrave does not like this at all. He looks at him with malevolence. That means hatred of like, what, you're not from South Africa. And he kind of scorns at him for saying these things. And he just doesn't like his personality either. But Davis goes on to tell more about himself, and they have a discussion there. We go on to section 4. This is actually section 3, and this is where they get mixed up. And I don't know why this is, but section 3 of chapter 2 is page 27, and this is where they meet Fred Narcott, who is sitting by the engine of the boat. He's the one taking them over. Right here, Mr. Narcott thinks to himself about that these passengers don't seem like the ordinary kind that usually come over to the island. So this is some textual evidence for that, if you want to take a moment to stop and just read that passage. Section 5 on here, but actually section 4, page 29 in your book, is when the boat comes up to the dock and they start to get out of the boat and go up to the house. Something very important about this section right here is that Philip Lombard said, "Must be difficult to land here in dirty weather." And Fred Narcott said cheerfully, "Can't land on the Indian Island or Soldier Island when there's southeasterly," and that means a southeasterly windstorm. "Sometimes 'tis cut off for a week or more." This is on page 29 in your book, and this foreshadows something, that he cannot come in his boat to get them if there's a storm. So if we think about that as good readers, we realize that, is there going to be a storm? Are they going to have trouble getting off the island? We don't know. Okay. Section 5, which is really, it says section 6 here, but it's section 5 in your book on page 30. We find out two things. We find out that the Mr. Owens is unfortunately delayed and unable to come here till tomorrow. Instructions, everything they wanted, if they would like to go to their rooms, dinner would be at 8. So this is when they get to the house and they find out the host is not there. Vera Claythorne follows Miss Rogers upstairs, and this is when we hear that conversation of where Vera thinks she looks very sickly and scared. And Mrs. Rogers shares she's never met Mrs. or Mr. Owens personally, and they share that that she never knew of her being a secretary. Vera is disturbed by this. So they have this conversation, and then you can see on page 33, and this is it on the right-hand side, is when Vera spots the Soldier's nursery rhyme, or the 10 Little Indians nursery rhyme, and she reads it. And she's the first person that we know of that sees this nursery rhyme. She has a moment of a flashback, that's a vocab word, of where she remembers the love of her life, Hugo, and that he left her because there was a little child that drowned. Cyril is a little child that drowned, and this is on page 35 in your book. Again, on page 35 in your book, this is a few things about Dr. Armstrong. It's his thoughts of, what if we needed to get off the island, and this place is strange, and he's just going through some of his thoughts since there's no hostess there. On page 37 in your book, Mr. Justice Wargrave thought to himself, he said he remembered Armstrong being in the witness box during a certain case. Him and Dr. Armstrong then have a conversation with each other. Justice Wargrave brings up the fact that he was invited by Constance Colmington and wanted to know where she was. But the butler, he doesn't know a Constance Colmington that was said to be coming. On page 38 of your book, section 8, I know this says section 9 right here, but it's section 8 in the book, Anthony Marston, he has a few thoughts to himself about being there, and he's just going to try to have a good time and have the cocktails. Section 9 on page 39 in your book talks about Mr. Blower, and just some things that he decides to do. Again, this is page 39 in your book, section 9, Mr. Blower. And so, an interesting quote here is that he said, "Remember this island when I was a kid. Never thought I'd be doing this sort of job in a house here. Good thing perhaps that one can't foresee the future," which is interesting because he had just met a man, an old man, that felt like he could see the future and that Judgment Day was coming for him. It says section 7 here, but it's actually section 11, or excuse me, it says section 12 here in your book, page 40, it's section 11. Philip Lombard came out of his room and walked to the head of the stairs. He moved like a panther, smoothly and noiselessly. There was something of the panther about him altogether, a beast of prey, pleasant to the eye. And Agatha Christie here has compared him to an animal, which is quite interesting. She does this with some other characters as well, so keep this in mind. In section 12, in your book, page 40, it talks about Emily Brent, and we discussed this. She read a section of the Bible right here, which can also be a foreshadowing. The heathen are sunk down in the pit that they made, in the net which they hid is their own foot taken. The Lord is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hand. The wicked shall be turned into hell. And her tight lips closed, she shut the Bible. Rising, she pinned a Carnarvon brooch at her neck and went down to dinner. So chapter 3 will start where they just finished dinner, but it's very important to just note for foreshadowing references that she was reading a piece of the Bible at the end of chapter 2. I hope this has helped for chapters 1 and 2. I hope all of these videos are going to help, and if you have any questions or comments about the video, something you didn't hear me say correctly or you didn't understand how I said it or what I meant, you may get back in touch with me, or leave a comment maybe if this posts right to YouTube, and hopefully it will. But I enjoy doing these and hope it's been helpful to you.